This is Jerry Barrett talking. Today's date is May 2nd, 1986. I'm continuing an interview with John Bradley in his office at the ALPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. John, why don't you continue?
Pick up. Okay. Well, I think in our last, where we kind of ended, was possibly my feelings of what the company and ALPA at the association, and I'll try to bring the association in as well, maybe could have done differently to not have the crisis that we had from pretty much of a labor relations point.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
As well as with Eastern, maybe a non-labor relations, we'll call it industrial relations, labor relations, but I think because historically and in the past, Eastern Airlines has always been able to resolve their problems through direct negotiations, or even not through the negotiation process. With Colonel Borman, and in particular with Bill Usry being there, in the past they've been able to just sit down, work out the difficulties that are there, and instead of having what is now turned into what I'd consider a war, where they would have little battles, and they would have little fights, but they could get resolved. And then when it was all over, everybody went home and you went back to business as usual, or maybe different, but at least you went back. Pilots flew their airplanes, the company ran the company, Mr. Borman did whatever he did, and everyone, and you ran a company. Mm-hmm. And I think this was also true with other employee groups. Now, over the years, there has been an eroding of that. For probably, there's always a combination. In my opinion, there's a number of factors that come into that. It would be very difficult, I think, to say Frank Borman was a bad guy and did this, or Bill Usry, or Larry Schulte, or John Bradley, or whoever it is. Mm-hmm. There's a combination of all these things that either make a company great and successful, and may also make it deteriorate and unsuccessful. I think Eastern has got a spirit, and always had. I mean, there have been, from the pilot ranks, there have been a lot of political things with Eastern historically, but there has always been a very warm, sensitive closeness among the employee groups, even within the various unions, the IM, the ALPA, let's just say mechanics, rampers, pilots, flight attendants, non-union people, and management. Mm-hmm. They've had problems, but they have had a spirit. They've had a rapport to each other, and they've tried to work problems out. Now, I will also say, since deregulation, a lot of problems within the airline industry have come about that have probably multiplied some of the problems that Eastern may have. The competitiveness, the new entrants, a lot of the things that have come up since deregulation have compounded the problems that employees would have with their employers, and that companies have with other companies. Mm-hmm. And I think, so there's a number of different things that come up. Now, I think also in a company the size of Eastern, it's difficult to run, manage, and handle everything with one person. I know that Eastern, through Colonel Borman and from Bill Usry and a number of other people, it has been viewed that Colonel Borman really called the shots, and with a lot of advice and counsel from a lot of other people. But wherein it used to be, I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to work with us all together to try to make this successful. Somewhere through these last, and I'm going to say, people are saying 10 years, but I'm going to say somewhere within the last 2, 3, and 4 years, somehow the divisiveness and the attitudes of the employees and management personnel changed. Now, whether or not it changed because of deregulation, whether it changed from personalities, whether it changed from all of a sudden having losses, financial losses, from not having the security of the regulated industry moving into the deregulation. Again, I think there's a number of different things that have happened. And also in that, profitability is tremendous. Everybody is happy. When it's not profitable and things are going bad, there's discontent, and people, kind of get at each other. I think even with those circumstances, because of the history of Eastern Airlines with its employees, it was still possible to meet and do things honorably without threats of strike, without threats of bankruptcy, without threats of all the dire circumstances. Some of those are, and this is what Eastern has done in the past, but it's credibility. I know that chairmen of companies, presidents of companies, senior executive officers don't always have to tell everything about a corporation to unions and to employees, but I think they have to be honest. And I think they have to turn around and say, yeah, there are some things going on that I really can't discuss with you, but there are some things going on, and when I'm able, I will. I think at one point Eastern Airlines had that with their employees. I think it changed, or at least people felt, and I'm going to say felt, that they have been misled and in some cases lied to. So all of a sudden the respect that you used to have dissipates.
Okay.
And I don't believe that you can build a company and have the labor relations that Eastern Airlines was through, I believe through Colonel Borman and Bill Essery and other people. I think what they wanted to have, they lost, and I believe they lost that because of a loss of, at least the way it appeared, a loss of respect and credibility. And I believe that the company also lost that respect and credibility with the leaders of the various unions, including our union. It's like, who threw the first rock? Doesn't matter, because somebody threw it. And so you react to actions. And if we may have said something publicly that offended the company, well, then the company is going to come back and say something that's going to offend the pilots, and boom, boom, boom. Right down, it's like anything else. Now, I believe that the company could have their posture in labor relations through the negotiations. I think they miscalculated and made a major, major mistake by going the route that they did. They forced us, and they forced the TWU, the flight attendants, into a position of having to fight. And I also believe that the company miscalculated. Once a corporate decision is made that you're going to go down this path, and it's a corporate decision, then you have to, like everyone else, you are accountable for your decisions. And you're accountable for your actions. But once that path, and it started, I believe, with the flight attendants, I believe the company thought that they could roll right over the flight attendants, impose the working conditions that they did do, expect a strike, and continue to fly. They were wrong. Not only were they wrong 2 years ago, they would have been correct. Or 3 years ago, they would have been correct. The pilots, in my view, 2, 3, or 4 years ago, would have crossed picket lines of the flight attendants. If the flight attendants would have struck this time, the pilots would not have crossed those picket lines. Because they knew that they were next. The pilots knew they were the next ones in that barrel, and that the company had made corporate decisions to take on the unions. Now it was not, let's sit down and work with the unions, let's take them on. So I really believe that the company miscalculated. And those pilots, I believe, would have honored the flight attendant strike if they had struck. I think the flight attendants were smart in not striking and let the company impose those working conditions, which was another error on the company, because the pilots then saw what the company would do to any other group, including the pilots. At that same time, though, the pilots are going through their labor relations, 1 day in direct negotiations, right into mediation, going into a 30-day cooling off period and to a strike or imposition of work conditions, to do to the pilots exactly what they did to the flight attendants. So the pilots had no choice. When they saw what was happening with the flight attendants, they would have honored their picket lines. 6 months before that, before this happened, the pilots would not have. Pilots are notorious for crossing picket lines. Pilots are notorious for self-preservation. It's too bad, I hate to say that, but it's true. On Eastern, in the past, pilots would do, if they were having a labor problem with the IM or the TW, anybody else, the pilots would do whatever the company wanted them to do because of the respect. I think when the corporate decision was made to take on the unions, the pilots, the flight attendants, and the IM said, okay, let's have the war. Let's do it. Let's finally be done with it. A number of terms were thrown out. Some of it was, were they going to fix it, or it's going to go down the tube, or something like that. I think all the labor groups finally said, we agree. We're either going to fix it, or it's going down. And I think they were ready to put it down. As I mentioned, I think earlier on tape with you, this would have been a classic case history for a strike. So that you could have it, you could have hit that person, and they could have hit you, and you have your catharsis, and the strike is over, and then you go back. In this case, you couldn't do it with Eastern because of the financial instability and other things that were going on. But it would have been in other times, this would have been a classic case, and the right place to have a strike, if there is such a thing. I believe, even with all these things that were going on, and again, I've got to state that I believe it starts in the corporate headquarters and those corporate decisions. Now, I'm not going to say that the company did not try to do some of the things I'm going to suggest to you right now. They may have. But I think that they probably didn't do it properly, or didn't do it through the right people, or did not do it through with a sense of meaning what they were trying to do because of the credibility loss. I think what's happening right now with your sitting in my office and our having this discussion shows an interest from somebody at the company to try to find out what happened, what's going on, and what's going to happen in the future. It's the first time I've seen this. There are people within that company that I think are tremendous. I mean, that want this to work, want it to be profitable, and regret what happened. And I think, as an example, I think that can happen. Again, I'm regressing a little bit. I think if the principals maybe would have taken steps closer to each other, maybe using third parties, using other people, we could have resolved what could have turned into a strike or a takeover before it happened. I mean, we could have said, we're going to have a goddamn strike, or we're going to have a takeover, or we're going to be in default. And let's take all those things and let's go to Washington, or let's go to Miami, or let's go to Atlanta. Let's go somewhere and sit in a room and lock ourselves in that room and do a think tank. Let's turn around and put a blackboard up there. And I'm going to list on that blackboard all the things that I don't like about you. And then you do the same thing to me. You tell me all the things you don't like about me. And then let's find out what we can do to resolve those differences. Maybe you can't do it. Maybe you're going to walk out of that room and you're going to still not like me, or I'm going to still not like you. But I will view you differently. And you will then know what's bothering me. And I'll know what's bothering you. I think instead of waiting till after the fact, a lot of our labor relations today, and not only at Eastern Airlines, and at a number of other places, I think we wait too long. We wait until the bad things happen to turn around and say, let's fix it.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not run the guy over and then go up and say, I'm sorry. Let's try to steer away from it and do something. A good example of this was 4, 5, 6 years ago with J.J. O'Donnell. or past president. I always say ex, and JJ is not an ex anything. He's a past president of this association. We had a tough, hard strike that lasted for 2 years with Wien Air Alaska. The issues were tough. The strike was tough. It's a little small airline up in Anchorage, Alaska. And it was probably a textbook strike. A lot of things happened that no one wanted to happen. From the labor's point of view, it was to a number of the pilots. I mean, there were suicides, there were bankruptcies, there were personal losses that were horrible. From the company side, I'm sure there were financial losses. There were a lot of angry people that probably did a lot of bad things, illegal things possibly, or alleged illegal things. It was bad. 2 years of this, 2 years of animosity, of hate, of real hate, of wanting to get the other people. Captain O'Donnell had a suggestion, and that strike was ended through a tag-on legislatively through the Deregulation Act, 1978. We had a presidential emergency board followed up, and that ended the strike. The strike ended because people wanted it to end, but it was tagged to a presidential emergency board. When that emergency board was completed and concluded, I'm not sure, but I believe it was Captain O'Donnell who had a suggestion and called some people in and asked, okay, this thing is going to end. Now how do we make it safe and how do we make it sound for people to go back? They had scabs, replacement workers. How do we put a striking pilot in the same cockpit with a non-striking pilot? The answer is you don't. You don't for a long time. But how do we resolve it? And I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe it was Captain O'Donnell's suggestion. If it was not, it was presented to Captain O'Donnell and someone else may have suggested it. Doesn't matter who. But he suggested what I call a charm school. It sounds flippant, but it's not. We took the principles. We took J.J. O'Donnell, myself, his executive administrator, the master chairman of the Wien Air pilots, Wien Air Alaska pilots, his name was Ron Wood, and I believe one more, maybe the vice chairman of that airline during the strike. The company took the president, the CEO, chief executive officer and president of the company, his executive vice president, his treasurer, and chief pilot, who their 4 or 5, whatever the number was, made up the guys that we perceived as being Wien Air Alaska. Our group was perceived by the company as the Airline Pilots Association.
Okay.
We met in Denver. We took a week. We had 2, I'm going to use the term industrial psychologists. Maybe they were clinical psychologists. I don't know what they were. And we agreed to meet in Denver for 5 days and to do whatever those industrial psychologists asked us to do. The first thing was, first of all, to agree to meet in the same city, or be in the same city.
Yes.
So, I mean, you can understand there was hatred in there, and this was bitter, bitter, bitter. We got to that point and said, okay, we'll do it. We did what I was suggesting to you on a blackboard. Only we didn't do it quite that way, but we had another force, if you will, third party, only there were several of them, who talked to us individually. Well, I mean, our group individually. And then they do the same thing to the company and back to us, and then somewhere down into maybe the second or third day, they put us together in the same room. And, you know, we were labor goons, we were communists, we were all the bad things in the world. And they were thieves and everything else in our view. Part of it, I've got to say, was funny. I mean, you know, the views, because they were so wrong. They were so totally wrong on what our objectives were, and we were so totally wrong on what their objectives were. So we went through 5 days of this, and we didn't walk out. We didn't necessarily like those people any better, and they probably didn't like. However, I think we did, and I think they liked us a little better because we all liked each other before the strike. But we did walk out of there knowing each other differently. And that brought us to the conclusion that assisted us in not only concluding the strike, but in trying to make Wien Airlines, all of our energies were now going to make it profitable, to make it somewhere where we could all work together. And all the energies and all the dollars and all the expenses and all the monies were now spent, instead of trying to hurt and destroy, to build and get not only back to where it was, but even better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess I went around this in a long way, but what I'm suggesting in a place like Eastern is maybe if someone would have taken the time, and maybe the right people have got to be involved in this,
Mm-hmm.
to turn around and say, you know, let's go lock ourselves in a hotel room in Atlanta and bring boxing gloves, or swear at me, or call me, whatever you want to call me, or tell me what I'm doing wrong in your view of running this airline. And let me tell you, Mr. Borman, and Mr. Borman say, let me tell you, Mr. Bradley, or Mr. Schulte, or whoever it is, and beat the hell out of each other for 3 days verbally. Abuse each other. But look, instead of having an airline die, or instead of having the airline be taken over, or instead of, labor relations, quite honestly, it's very serious and it's very real, and it's the profitability, life, death of an airline and employees. Before it gets to that, I mean, there still is honor. I guess the term is there is even honor among thieves. Well, if we're thieves or they're thieves, let's at least be honorable about it and lock ourselves in a room and solve the problems and work on, and if they're not solvable, admit it.
Mm-hmm.
And turn around and say, well, God damn it, I don't like what you're doing. I won't do it, and maybe we can find a different way, but I'm not going to do it that way. And say it. Be done with it.
Was anything like that ever suggested or considered?
I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
I really don't. To my knowledge, no. I'll tell you, it could have been. At one point, and I don't want to suggest to you that I feel that I was a key player in too much of this. I may have been in certain areas, but I believe one of the most important things that happened that I personally was involved in was at one point I met with Bill Ussery alone. And Bill and I met in Miami with in fact, the mediator called Bill Ussery and called John Bradley, called us together. It was a mediator's suggestion. And asked, the mediator, obviously...
Your phone just...
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Bill called, or the mediator, Bob Brown, called and said, John, I'd like you to come over to my hotel room, and I'm going to tell you, I've invited Bill Ussery because I think you guys should talk in front of me. And we did. At that point, I got to know Bill Ussery better than I have ever known him.
Mm-hmm.
He told me, very openly and candidly, where they were going. I knew pretty much where they were going, or at least what I suspected, but Bill was very open. I very openly and candidly told Bill what was going to happen if they took that route. And I suggested very strongly that we meet and talk, and that the principals, being Colonel Borman and Bill Ussery, be totally involved in this, or we were not going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I think after that we met in Washington and we got as close as we were ever going to get to reaching an agreement.
This was the meeting now in January of '86.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I had been smarter, or if I had been maybe a little bit, it's always nice Monday morning quarterbacks, but if maybe I would have suggested a different approach, or if Bill did, maybe it would have, maybe he and I, or maybe just John Bradley, or maybe Bill Ussery, maybe we were not smart enough to turn around and look at a different, instead of seeing it going down, because I told Bill what we were going to do if it kept going down the road it was going. We were going to gear up our troops. We were going to get the teleconferencing going. We were going to have all these meetings, our strike headquarters, we were going to move. We had to move. If it could have been slowed down, which it couldn't be once we got into that mediation aspect, and we knew that the company was looking for a release and a proffer, we knew we only had 60 days. We had actually, at that point, we had less than 60 days. Or I thought we had less than 60 days. So we did not have the time not to cover all the bases that a good union has to cover. I think if we'd have had the time, and we'd have had more conversations that were very open and candid, such as what I'm talking about, we would not have gone through all this. You know, it could have been Larry Schulte and maybe the other unions as well. I'm speaking primarily ALPA now. But perhaps the TWU, because they were in the dire straits of their problem. Maybe it could have been whoever their leaders are, the IM leaders, and ALPA and the company, although I doubt it, because there's not real good blood between the IM and ALPA at Eastern. And however, I think it's pretty good with the TWU, but I think it could be better. So if nothing else, strictly the company and ALPA with the leaders, because I think we were on the point, and I think other people would have followed whatever we did. And if we were successful, then I think the IM or the TWU would have at least tried it to see if they were successful. I guess what I'm really saying is that instead of going down a suicide course or a disaster course, or a course that everybody knows is going to get you in trouble, why not change the course? And, you know, the regrets that I have from what happened there, that's one of them. I truly wish that I would have been more perceptive, because Bill Ussery was very perceptive and very receptive to ideas and thought. He was looking and searching, and I'm sure Colonel Borman was, and I know the pilots were, to find another way, because in today's environment, the normal way of labor relations is not to go down that avenue and that road to a strike, because we kill each other.
Yes.
It's suicidal. There has got to be another procedure. And I'll tell you, I believe, until I hear somebody else give me a better way to go, that the way that I'm suggesting may be at least one shot at it. While you're there, while you're still talking to each other, before you really cut each other's throats and watch each other bleed to death, let's take the principles, throw them in a room, and let them beat each other up for a while. We do it ourselves. ALPA does it in what we call council meetings, MEC meetings. We'll go in and we'll close the door. If you get 5 pilots together, they've all got 5 different opinions and views on any subject you can suggest. So if you get 30, you've got 30. But we'll close the door and we may beat each other up for a couple of days, but then we'll walk out, and 99% of the times we have one way to go. We put it aside, which is another beauty, I believe, of ALPA. But I don't see any reason, and I know there should be confrontation between unions and companies. I mean, that's part of the name of the game. But not to death, not to destroy each other. I believe in the labor management scales of justice. If one gets out of whack, there's going to be a problem. If the other's out of whack, there's going to be a problem. But I don't believe, to destroy each other is just crazy. And I think that maybe when we know we're going down that road, you got to bring in some other, I don't want to say intellectuals, into other brains, other ideas, other points of view to say, how do you solve a problem that's insolvable? Because nothing in this world is insolvable, in my opinion. And it can be done. And it could have been done at Eastern. And I think it was done at Wien, which was a loss. Everybody thought it was a total loss. Most strikes, the TWA flight attendant strike now, that could be resolved if people want to resolve it. But they've got to want to resolve it.
At Wien, who suggested this get-together in Denver? Where did the idea come from? Do you know?
I think it probably, I don't know for sure. I think it probably came from, the way it came out was that a senator or a congressman suggested it to somebody. If I had my guesses, I think that Captain O'Donnell may have suggested it through a different source. or maybe one of Captain O'Donnell's confidants.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It could have been, maybe it did come from a congressman or a senator. That's the way it came to us to get to Ween's management. In other words, if Captain O'Donnell would have said, let's meet in Denver, the company would have said, go pound sand,
Sure.
O'Donnell, you
Yeah.
just killed us,
Yeah.
or you're trying to kill us,
Yeah.
or if they'd have done it. So
Yeah.
I think it came from what I would call a neutral source,
Yeah.
whose idea was, doesn't really matter. But where...
But it has to come sort of under that umbrella of
Oh, yeah.
some neutrality. Nobody's got an
Sure.
axe to grind. We both may benefit.
Yeah,
Nobody will lose.
yeah, and you get somebody, and I don't mean an arbitrator, and I don't necessarily mean anybody involved in the industry, and I don't necessarily mean a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It could be someone who just said, look, I've got a point of view here that I think you guys are killing yourselves. And I see you're going down a road of disaster.
Mhm.
Would you talk to me? Do you have enough integrity to talk to me alone? Most people, if they're rational, are going to say yes.
Mhm.
Then go to the other side and do the same thing. And then the next question is, do you have enough integrity to talk to me and the guy who you're trying to kill? I mean, it's tough. It's
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah.
The right person can do it, and under the right circumstances, it can be done.
Mhm. Do you think basically it's too late at Eastern to do something like that?
No, I don't. I'll tell. Well, maybe it is. Yeah, it could very well be. Only because I really believe the worst thing that could have happened at Eastern happened, and that's the takeover. I believe Frank Borman no longer has control. I expect because of that, his confidants and people around him probably do not have control. And TAC has control, or
Okay.
will have control very shortly. I know that there has been, or I have read in the paper, or daily or something, that some people are trying to get someone else to take the company over, to get Lorenzo out. Whether that's possible or practical or real, I don't know. If that happened, I would say yes. I don't believe that it's going to be possible with TAC taking the company over. I think Eastern is on a downhill. I think it's in a death. It's going down, and it's going to go further. The labor relations, the track record of Frank Lorenzo on labor relations is not good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe what we have done at other airlines would be possible to do with Frank Lorenzo. That's a personal opinion. I've
Mhm.
never met the man, but that's my personal feeling. I think if the management at Eastern would have stayed the way it was, with Colonel Borman, Ussery, and the rest of them, and they wanted to do it, which I believe they would, I definitely believe it could have changed. I think what happened could have been prevented, and I think even if there had been a bankruptcy, if there had been other things that happened with the same players, we could do something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid at this point, only because of TAC taking over, that the credibility, the integrity, and everything that goes with that, I think Eastern is no longer Eastern, which is very sad.
Yeah.
And I believe that to be true.
In a way, if a meeting were held now under the present circumstances, as you described it, either with the pilots and Eastern management, high-level management, or with all three unions and Eastern management, they might be able to level with each other about what has happened in the past.
Yes.
But there's a big question mark over the future, because you don't know whether that management will be there.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're saying.
Oh,
that-
very definitely.
Yeah.
Very definitely. Oh, I definitely believe that if TAC had not taken over the company, I would strongly recommend this. I would have recommended it already to do exactly what I'm saying.
Mhm.
You sure can't hurt, you can't lose. And I think that everybody wants it. Everybody wants it to be right, but no one knows how to make it right.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you can't hurt by trying something. And it's not necessarily new. It's been tested in places that we've been before. And even if it did not work, it's going to add it's not going to take anything away from anyone, other than maybe some time, which we certainly can all give for this. I'm very concerned. You know, for a moment, let's just turn around and say someone else did come in and buy Eastern.
Yeah.
I don't know who, I mean, the term white knight, whatever that means.
Okay.
Then maybe it could be. And maybe it could be even with Lorenzo taking it over. I think not. I really, truly believe not. Because, and I'm not even too sure if someone else came in. Because what we're really talking about is the integrity of people who have lived together for years and years. We're talking about Frank Borman. We're talking about Bill Usry. We're talking about his people that have been Eastern Airlines for as long as Frank's been there, 12, 15 years, whatever that is. I'm not sure of that number. But that's Eastern Airlines. When someone says Eastern Airlines, you think Frank Borman.
Yes.
I mean, that's it. Eastern Shuttle, Frank Borman, astronaut. You think of the man.
Yes.
You really do.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
And if someone else came in there, Eastern Airlines, you even say it a little lighter. You don't say it with the enthusiasm that you did a year ago, 6 months ago. So I think it would be difficult. And again, I think because of the circumstances, it would have to be structured. I don't think it could be done with all three unions because of what the IAM, in the eyes of ALPA and probably the TWU and definitely the company, did or did not do. We feel that if the IAM would have come on board, what happened would not have happened. Other reasons as well, but that's one of them.
Yeah. You're talking there, this last round of
Yes.
negotiations where
Yes.
they were not willing to open their contract.
Yeah, they would not give what was necessary to give.
So there's
Which
there
tells
really-
you a lot of the hostility and the anger and the hate, which is probably a good reason to do what I'm suggesting. Really.
Yes.
It's too bad that I'm suggesting it now. But and you may have a very good point, Jerry. It may not be too late. I don't know. It may be interesting to see you try that on somebody, or to suggest that, or maybe to test the water a little bit. I'm not sure where it would get us, but I think it's certainly worthwhile to test. The only reason I'm sounding a little negative about it, and I hate to sound negative on anything, but the reason that I may be sounding a little negative is because it's no longer the Eastern Airlines that it used to be.
Yes.
Because of the people.
Yes.
I don't care if there's problems in it. You know, you can resolve problems. That's what we're all here for. That's what we do. You can resolve the problems, but the players are different.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about 12 years under one regime, even if you didn't like them, you know, maybe you can change it.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about. Now, I'm not too sure with TAC and everything that stands for, that it's possible to do it at Eastern Airlines now, because Eastern is now perceived as TAC and not Frank Borman, even though it has not been completed yet.
Yeah. It's changing into something that we don't know.
Yeah.
No one really knows or can predict.
That's right.
But-
We don't know what the future of Eastern Airlines is, and it's very, very scary. And if it's scary to you as a passenger and John Bradley as an ALPA representative, think what it is to the employees. A disaster. I mean, emotionally, a complete disaster. Now, I wish we could fix that.
Yeah.
And if there is some way that we can, I would like to be part of that fix. I really would.
Let me take you back to a point that you made earlier. You said that it was clear to you, as an ALPA representative, that there was a corporate decision made to take on the flight attendants, and then it appeared once they did that, ALPA would be next in line to be taken on.
Yes.
This is late 85, going on into 86.
Yes.
And you use that to explain why the pilots stood behind the flight attendants in terms of would have supported their strike. In the spring of '83, there was a threatened strike by the machinists, and a good bit of preparation on the part of Eastern and its unions to fly through that strike if the machinist did do that. I'm told there was additional training done for people, a lot of preparation, a lot of psyching people up, and apparently a great deal of enthusiasm for, let's take on those machinists. Let's show them.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, there must have been a corporate decision made then that they were going to do that, and everyone else but the machinist was drawn into.
Yeah, but there's an interesting piece of that, Jerry. There was a corporate decision done, but that corporate decision was made with the pilots. If the pilots had said, we're not going to cross those IAM picket lines, that company could not have done it.
Okay.
All right? If the IAM and ALPA shut it down, if ALPA and the IAM really made a decision that the IAM's going on strike and we pilots are going to honor that picket line, that company can't move.
Okay.
Now, the company knew that. The company knew that the pilots at that point probably would cross the picket lines.
Okay.
And quite possibly might even have done struck work, which is anathema to a labor union.
Yes, certainly is.
Absolutely anathema. But it shows you that even at that point, there was a relationship. Frank Borman was talking to the MEC. The MEC responded to Colonel Borman, and they were talking. And they were saying, we're going to make this airline run. And if the IAM wants to shut it down, it never came to pass.
Yes.
But the probability was that those pilots would have flown. So the corporate decision was made not alone corporate. It was done with the pilots.
Okay.
Or at least the company at least thought that the pilots, if they were not in fact told, which I believe they were not, but the company felt that they could rely on the pilots and that the pilots would cross picket lines and would fly those airplanes, and that the flight attendants would also.
Okay. Now this is much.
I think that's a very, very good point, Jerry.
Okay.
Because the corporate decision at that point was done with certain employees.
Okay. And much different than the decision made in late '85 then.
Oh yes, the decision in late '85 was a strict corporate decision. The one in '83 was done with employees. That's my point.
Mm-hmm.
That's entirely my point.
Okay.
Now back into '85, going into this thing, they turned around and said, I'm going to fight those guys. I'm going to fight them all. But I'm going to start with the weakest link, which happens to be the flight attendants. And then they thought that they would take on the pilots, and the pilots would fold. And the pilots did not. That's where it really started to break down.
Mm-hmm. And that's really the reason that the pilots did this media blitz that they did.
Absolutely.
There was
that was right out of the plan, right out of our way of doing things. Once we get, and I think any union, but I think ALPA is often perceived as being a pretty soft labor union. We're kind of like the AMA. We're a little bit more. We're more of an association than a union. But I'll tell you, when you get a group of pilots angry, and you really get them upset, it's a very, very powerful union. Mm-hmm. We truly could shut down the world. If Captain Duffy or Captain O'Donnell back then really, truly wanted to, if there was a safety issue, or a hijacking thing, or a terrorism problem, and he called all 49 of his carriers into a meeting, of the master chairman, said, we're not flying. And they all said yes, this industry would cease.
Mm-hmm.
They do have the power to do that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they have the brains, and they're not radical people.
Right.
And the pilots are not radical people. But if you really piss off the pilot group, if you will, and you really get them angry enough, as would happen at Eastern,
mm-hmm.
they will become union people.
Mm-hmm.
They
mm-hmm.
really will. And they did, and Eastern's a great example of it. And once you cross that bridge, once you turn around and say, I'm going to war, you don't want to go to war with pilots, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're really the one group of employees here that can shut it down. The flight attendants, you can replace them. The mechanics, usually you can get more mechanics. Pilots, if you really pull them all out, you can't go hire new pilots. You can't get them that fast. You certainly can't get 727, 1011 people. If you got a small airline, you can replace them.
Yes.
You got 100 guys down there, you have small light equipment, you can replace them. You can't do it with 3,000.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with true at United. You couldn't replace all those pilots. And especially if you do a news blitz, media blitz, everything that we are capable of doing and have the money and the resources to do,
Mm-hmm.
you know, this association is as powerful and as tough as it wants to be. And it is also as understanding and has got as big a heart as you would ever want to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like kind of a family thing. It's a very small industry, but you know, I may have a brother that a lot of people don't like, and I may think he's a real son of a gun, and I may call him a son of a gun, but I don't want you to.
Yeah.
Okay, he's still my brother.
Yes, that's right.
There's a lot of that in this.
He's your
industry.
son of a gun, right?
Yeah, you know, but I believe there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I think the pilots love the companies in 99% of this thing. They love the companies they work for.
Yeah.
They appreciate being hired by that company when they're new and young. They love getting the paychecks. They love to fly. They like most corporate structures. They don't mind that. They're pilots. They're not business, a lot of them are businessmen. But they don't really want to run the company. They want to run their airplanes. They
Mm-hmm.
want it to be safe and professional, and they want it to be done in the best way that they know how.
Mm-hmm.
And ALPA helps them and assists them to do that.
That strategy in January to do the media thing and to really get the pilots ready for what looked like it was for sure strike.
Yeah.
Was there concern in ALPA that do you have to get that?
Yeah. Well, what was your question?
Do you have to? Was there concern that you were going to march them up there and then not be able to turn it off if you needed to?
Yes. Let me ask.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Pete. Are we at?
Yes.
Okay. I believe the question is really were we.
Okay, we're back on.
Okay, I think, Jerry, the question really is with our news blitz, our media, our campaign to go forward in the event of a strike, did we have a concern or whether or not the pilots would really go on strike?
Well, no, I'm saying it a
Oh,
little different way. That of course, I'm interested in that question too.
Okay.
But you did such a comprehensive job in getting people ready for it. What if there wasn't a strike? You know, in other words, would you have built up so much enthusiasm for it, just like in '83, where the company had built up this enthusiasm for taking on the machinists. There was great disappointment and some anger about the company not following through.
Yeah.
So here, if peace broke out after you prepared for war,
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what happened.
Okay.
We did not have the strike.
yeah,
And I can tell you, there were an awful lot of disappointed people. And you are absolutely, it's a terrific question. Our news blitz, our everything that we did, and they went forward, the stirring up, you know, it's like bulls coming out of the chutes. Everybody's hyped up and you're on a roll here. It is a big problem. However, at the end of it, and that's exactly what happened with Easter. We did not strike, but we had reasons why we did not strike, and people understood them. I'm not saying all the people understood them either. There were people out there at that point that wanted to shut it down so bad you can't believe it. But it depends on, that's really another subject that, I mean, that's another hours that we could go into on strike preparation, and I mean from a labor point of view. But I can tell you, I think from most pilots' point of view, they don't want to strike. Pilots do not want to strike. They will if necessary, and they will be ready if necessary. And that's what our obligation was to our membership, to make damn sure everything was ready. Now, in the event we reach a settlement or some occurrences happen that we feel by going out would be detrimental to our people, then we explain that to them, and we tell them that. And under these circumstances, that's exactly what happened. There was going to be a strike. I don't have any doubt of that. The occurrences that came from the board of directors on those final days preempted it. And in the judgment and the decision of the Master Executive Council, that was it. They decided not to go out. But it's very interesting that there are some real questions on that. Once that fever pitch goes up, how do you bring it down? And the only way you bring it down is by either getting a settlement that everybody understands or explaining what happened so that sound, practical minds can really, unemotional minds can understand it. Because there is an emotional state and frenzy that people get built into. But I can assure you that at least in the pilot ranks, nobody wants to strike.
Mm-hmm.
And if they know and they believe in the leadership of their own airline and the national, that if it's called because there is no other choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we gear them into. But it's hard. It's hard to gear them down again, Jerry.
Yeah.
To that,
Yeah, that's
that's it
okay.
for now.
Right.
Oh.
This is the end of the tape.